The following webinar on stage management mentoring was presented on Monday, January 12th, 2015 by the Stage Managers Association with the assistance of Propared. Propared is building revolutionary, cloud-based management software designed specifically for live event professionals. We would like to thank Ryan Kirk and Propared for making this conversation possible. Learn more about Propared by visiting propared.com. The Stage Managers Association is the organization for professional stage managers in the United States. In the fall of 1981, a group of New York stage managers held a get-together to meet their counterparts on the Royal Shakespeare Company's Nicholas Nickleby. That get-together was the inspiration for us to start regular meetings, at first on a social basis, then as an official business meeting in February 1982. In 1985, we incorporated as a not-for-profit professional business association in the state of New York. In addition to educational activities for the industry, such as operation observation, forums, chats, and seminars, we advocate and provide stage management networking opportunities for those working in the profession across the country. The following is part one of our conversation.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Eric de Lima Rube. I am going to be playing the role of your moderator this evening. I am the marketing and creative director for Propared, a software startup that's developed technology and applications for use by live event professionals, especially managers and designers. At night, I'm slathering myself in blue paint as a member of Blue Man Group based in Orlando, Florida. So if anybody's ever down there, come look me up. Very excited that both the Stage Management Association and Propared have been able to come together to both offer some thoughts on this idea of mentoring this evening and how we can maybe better establish these connections for ourselves as we move forward in our careers. I'm very delighted that we have Mandy Berry, who many of you may know. She's a professional stage manager based in New York. She's also the vice chair of the SMA.
Hello. I'll just give you a little short background of everything. So I started out in the university level stage managing. I graduated from East Carolina University, which is in North Carolina. I moved to New York shortly after that, where I began freelancing as a stage manager. I interned at the Juilliard School for a year doing dance, theater, and opera. I worked for 2 years at Alvin Ailey for the Ailey 2 company. I have also freelanced all over the country for regional opera in Santa Fe, in Indianapolis, Omaha, Charlotte, Atlanta, and then I also freelanced in the off-Broadway world, as well as started doing corporate events in New York City. And then I took 4 years and toured with Cirque du Soleil as one of their calling stage managers on one of their touring productions. And then I have been back in New York for about 2 years, working full-time as a technical producer for an events company called CS Global, which is based in New York. They do events all around the world. And that is what I currently do.
And then joining us also we have Ryan Kirk, who is the president of Tink Productions, a live event production company based in Brooklyn, New York, and he's also the chief executive officer and founder of Propared.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My background started in stage management. I have an undergrad degree from Virginia Tech, where I did mostly stage management work. Upon moving to New York, though, I wound up in a lot of different technical fields, a lot of lighting work, and eventually moved into production management, where I freelanced for a long time, and then wound up forming a production company called Tink Productions in 2007. And since then, we've gone on to manage somewhere in the realm of 2,000 events of every shape and size imaginable, from theater to festivals to concerts, trade shows, fashion. You name it, we've probably encountered it at some point. And it was through those experiences, as well as an MBA that I got at NYU, that we started thinking very critically about our workflow as managers in this industry, and that led us to founding a second company called Propared, which our mission is to really hypercritically examine our workflow as managers and to hopefully create tools for doing our jobs better in the industry. And that was formed 2 years ago, and 2 months ago we released our first product, which is a cloud-based software platform designed specifically for managers in this industry to handle logistics and scheduling.
Thanks, Ryan. It's great to have you both here, and I thought that I might sort of start by posing the general question of what is mentoring. We hear a lot about it and sort of what it means and how it's applied, and I'm sure that a lot of people that are attending this evening, I know for me and probably for you as well, we have our own definition of what that means and how we actually apply it. We wanted to start off really by saying right off the bat that we believe in our conversations and sort of getting this panel together that everybody is a mentor. No matter where you are at in your career, you have the opportunity to both mentor someone and be mentored by somebody. We really believe that our industry especially really lends itself to being able to play both roles at any given time almost interchangeably. So with that in mind, we wanted to sort of present a dictionary definition of what mentoring is. Taking this and applying it to how it's actually practiced, I guess I would turn to you, Ryan and Mandy, and sort of ask you, how do you define mentoring? What does it mean for you in the work that you've done and the work you continue to do?
I would say for me, it's a very organic thing. I don't think of it as a formal process, and I think that's just because I've worked in such an informal environment my entire life. And to me, when I think of who was my mentor over the last 20 years of my career, I think of the people that I've worked with and that I've interacted with and that perhaps didn't even know that they were a mentor, but the whole time I'm looking up at them going, I want to be you when I grow up, or I want to be you in 5 years, I want to be you in 10 years, or this is my next trajectory in terms of goals. And they become my mentor because they have these attributes that I look for in my job and how I want to be perceived in my job and in my roles. So over my life, there's been many mentors in different varying shapes, and depending on the job and depending on what I was doing and the place I was at that time. And then for me, I don't see myself as someone who is mentoring, but like you've just said, it happens all the time, and that's what I strive for. I want people that are working with me and around me to know why it is that I do what I do, and also if they have questions, to feel like there's an environment for that they are always welcome to ask those questions and to learn more, and really just striving to be better than what you are. So for me, that's what mentoring is, and that's what it represents.
So for me, I think it's a very similar idea. I think part of where I get hung up sometimes when we talk about, again, coming back to the formal definition of mentor and mentee, is that it carries a lot of connotation with it, which I think is rightfully been sort of well thought about and well looked at over the years, particularly when you think about it from the perspective of kind of the corporate world and what it means to be a formal mentor, and it for me that implies a sort of a rigid structure, and a lot of a lot of preconceived notions about what those things are. And I think for us in our industry, in the sort of the live event theater industry, we by our sort of in our very nature do a lot of things that are unexpected, or we sort of operate in ways that very much of the traditional corporate world doesn't work. And so I think for us that requires some either a new definition or perhaps a more flexible definition. And so for me that kind of lends itself to this idea that to what Eric said before, sort of we are always learning and we are always teaching. And anyone, no matter who they are, can be in a position to both learn and teach, simultaneously, depending on the specifics of the situation.
Mandy, when you're at a job site or you're working on a particular production, how do you take those basic principles and apply them to day-to-day work?
I think in the way that you do that is in stage management. It's all about stage management and production management. It's all about personality management. Is a good chunk of what you do every day, and how you assess people and getting people the things that they need at any given time, and kind of anticipating those needs. So you're very in tune with the people that are around you and what their needs are, and so you can. I like to look at who's eager, like who is standing there ready for their next job. I want to, I'm finished, and then I'm ready for the next task. And those people are the ones that they're eager for knowledge. They're eager to impress, and they want to learn. And that's what I want to teach them. And often in the corporate environment, we have interns actually that work for the company that I currently work for, and they're fresh out of college, and they don't necessarily come from a theater entertainment background. So for me, it's very easy because they come from fashion, because I work with a mostly fashion company now. And so things that are second nature to me and some stage managers, like headset etiquette or radio etiquette, are not second nature. So it's kind of fun to go back to those times, the first time you put on a radio and you're talking with 40 other people that you may not know and that have been in this industry for longer than you've been alive. And so you say, okay, this is what we have to do, and this is the steps for that, and this is how you speak to people. And so I constantly try to just remember who I'm working with and where they are in their careers, and then that way it's kind of a constant behavior for me, and now has become a bit second nature, so that I'm always just assessing where everyone is around me to make sure that everyone, one, can keep up, because the better everyone understands the situation, the better my event is going to go. So it's beneficial to me that everyone knows. So it's kind of come in secondhand. But on larger events, I always try to talk with everyone that I'm working with, as well as have them answer my questions, because like we've all said, you're constantly learning and you always want to be better. So like I did an event last week in Atlanta, and I was working with stage managers, two of which I'd worked with before, one of which I had not. And it was just fantastic because I got to sit with this new stage manager on stage right in between cues, and we're just chatting about our experiences and I actually talked about mentoring and about, what we had learned over the years. And that to me is fantastic. And it's those kind of golden opportunities to take advantage of and learn from the people in your industry that are there. As well as then watching these other two stage managers that are much older than me and have been doing the type of trade show that I did last week for many years. And so it was just a fantastic opportunity for me to kind of step back and be taught, which was great. And I just want to reiterate those principles when I am then with other stage managers or production managers.
One of the things, Mandy, that I heard you talking a lot about, looking towards people that were in those roles before you, or you had the opportunity to observe. So Ryan, as someone who certainly had those opportunities too, but took a slightly different route in actually, forming your own company that produced live events, how did you practice basic principles to be able to apply them to a company that you ran versus a company that you worked for?
That's a really great question. And I think that for me, it starts sort of with, my personal life as a mentee, again, for lack of a better word. But, when I left school, I had been stage managing, like I said, for about 4 years, and I moved to New York not too long after that. And my initial thought was that, okay, I've been stage managing as in theater, therefore I am qualified to stage manage in theater. And once I arrived in New York, I discovered that this set of skills that I had been developing was actually much, much more flexible, and actually opened up a lot more opportunities for me than I was originally anticipating. I found out that not only were there all kinds of other opportunities within live events that I could apply these management skills, as Mandy was saying. It's not about schedules and contact lists and things like that. It's about interactions with people. Management is about bringing people together, motivating, and seeing a project through from start to finish. And that's not easy. It's very, very difficult to teach. And so, when I think about mentoring, in addition to sort of who I'm talking to in any given moment, the other thing that I try to think about is, what am I teaching, and what can I learn from this situation? I think a great example for me was, moving to New York and expanding my sort of repertoire of skill sets. And one of those was in lighting. And I worked as an electrician for a number of years and slowly began to move my way up into sort of some of the leadership positions in the lighting department. So assistant electrician, head electrician, those types of roles. And for me, once I got to those positions and I could start reasserting some of my skills that I had learned while stage managing, I was able to excel very much in those positions because it was, again, taking the same core concepts of leading a team forward as you do as a stage manager, just applying a new set of subject matter to it. And so coming back around to your question, Eric, about starting the company, starting Tink and then sort of ultimately Propared, there was a lot of similarities there where now instead of a specific subset of performance or theater or things like that, now I'm talking about we're talking about overseeing an entire company, which then of course led to, well, once I began doing more teaching and we started our internship programs and things like that, we now had all kinds of different skill sets that we could potentially teach to other people. Everything from, again, pure, live event management techniques to technical skills to business type opportunities, marketing and operations and strategy on a much larger scale than just a single production.
One of the things that you just touched on there that I think is really important is this idea of multiple job roles, how a lot of us in live events over the course of our careers, we end up wearing so many hats, even if we know for sure we have a particular speciality or something that we want to pursue over the course of our career. We do end up working in a lot of different roles to gain experience, exposure, oftentimes to make connections that we wouldn't be able to make otherwise. And that's really interesting because when you talk about mentoring in the larger context, the way it's practiced in the more of the business world and the corporate structure is that's a much more formalized process. When you go to work for a larger company, oftentimes there is a mentoring program that is very similar to an internship. It has certain guidelines and expectations that are set for both the senior level person who's going to be the mentor and the junior level person who is first coming into the company. And there are certain milestones that need to be hit, and it actually usually ends up becoming a part of the requirements for keeping your job and your contract if you're on one. And I think that the reason that this ends up developing over time is that the corporate structure allows for this formal process to take place because that entity is bringing in people at an entry-level position and expecting them to sort of grow within that company over a long period of time. Whereas what you're identifying and what Mandy's talking about is really more informal, where you're sort of taking piece by piece as you move to job and sort of amassing this body of knowledge that you can then apply in other situations as a mentor or as a mentee in your next gig. Would you say that that's a sort of fair difference?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's also another factor that you have to consider, and that's a lot of us work in a freelance environment, and that's what a lot of our career paths are going to be. And you're not necessarily going to have that formalization. And so unless you work as an internship for a set theater company, Santa Fe Opera has an internship for their stage management department for their summer stock. There are plenty of other theaters that also do it. Juilliard also has an internship, which is kind of like a mentorship, I guess, for a year for stage managers. But in the freelance world, when you're actually working, there's this level of how do you get there, and that, like, I think that's the hardest challenge we find in how to mentor, right? So it's taking away and making that applicable to our to our lifestyle. I don't know if we're there yet. Sorry.
What I think that we could probably put together is some of these key takeaways that might maybe I'll start with Ryan. Maybe you could speak to formal versus informal mentoring process, and especially the piece about the nature of the live event industry and why it's never really beyond, like Mandy said, some of your larger companies, why not just it doesn't exist, but it's almost unable to exist just based on the way people move in and out of companies.
Yeah, no, it's such a great observation, and I think for me it speaks to an even broader concept that we can all embrace as professionals in this industry, and that is and I think I mentioned this briefly before, but that's just the uniqueness of our industry and how very different our world is in terms of just general structure than you would look at in terms of like a traditional corporate environment. And that's something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about between both at Tink and Propared. When we first started Tink, and just a quick little side story here, when we started Tink, we looked for software to help us deal with our day-to-day lives. We were going to be managing multiple events simultaneously. We had freelancers. We had just all kinds of uncertainty and complexity to our world that we needed assistance with, and we couldn't find anything. And so we built some stuff internally, and that was ultimately kind of the birth of Propared. But in all of that, particularly once we started with the software, there was always this question of, okay, well, why is it that the options that are out there in terms of software, why do we sort of summarily reject all of them and kind of fall back on these very, very flexible but inefficient tools like your Google Docs and those types of things, and email, which are very, very flexible but inherently inefficient. And so I think we need to approach mentoring sort of the same way. Mentoring, as you said, has this very sort of formal, rigid structure in the corporate world, and I think we need to examine our world very, very closely before we can identify perhaps some key takeaways that might very much apply for us. And just as to name a few of these sort of differences, again, I think we've touched on a couple of them, but it's a very freelance world. We're constantly on the move. The projects that we work on are very short term, and so for a lot of us, we'll see and interact with a group of people for a short amount of time, and then we're on to the next job. So you get this very sort of job to job to job kind of mentality, and you don't have the opportunity for those long-term relationships to build as they would over the years in corporate settings. As you said, we have limited resources, so we have limited time and money. We're constantly doing the jobs of multiple people simultaneously, and that requires a lot of effort and a lot of work, and potentially limits the amount of time that we can spend solely devoted to mentoring. And again, sort of that lack of corporate structure prevents that, sort of, for lack of a better term, that water cooler type, conversation that you can have, in the middle of the day. And then, thinking about our jobs in particular as stage managers, and quite frankly, any manager, in live events, it tends to be relatively solitary. For a stage manager on a typical show, there's one, maybe two stage managers. On bigger shows, there's a couple more, but really you're talking about a very small number of people, and stage managers inherently have, you need pretty thick skin to do your job and things like that. And so I think just the structure of that job in and of itself creates some challenges when you start thinking about it, sort of in terms of the industry at large. And then, one other point is that, a lot of work is also done outside of normal business hours. There's not that 9 to 5. I know I can find the person exactly where they're going to be. And so that, paperwork being done outside of rehearsal spaces and things like that creates some challenges as well. So I think those are the types of things that we need to think about, and then kind of say, okay, well, how can we come up with some ways to to fit within this unique mold that we find ourselves in.
There's no ASM department to go to talk and find people like you have,
Exactly.
your water cooler mentality, as you said. Like I can't go to the third floor and say, okay, I need a dance stage manager. Who is it? There's no place where this is all combined. And like Ryan said, it's you're often working with two people at a time. So if you just got your first stage management job, two other people. Are you going to hound those two people to death? Well, you should a little bit, but don't want to be obnoxious. So who do you go to for? I just did an off Broadway show. Now I'm gonna do the next step. But you two were just on the off Broadway. So how do I get to the next step? Because you guys were in the same place I was. Where do you find these people?
Mandy, that's a really interesting point too, because a lot of what both you and Ryan are talking about, when you talk about sort of principles behind good mentoring and good networking, and what you're really identifying as different is the way that we practice it, as opposed to the core principles of what it is to mentor or be mentored. Would you say that that's pretty accurate?
I think for me inherently what we're sort of getting at here, is again that the necessity for some kind of less rigid structure, a more informal version of mentoring than perhaps what you would find in many other settings.
So if you're thinking about opportunities that have come up in the past where some things have worked or maybe some things have didn't, I'd love for you to share some of your stories from or examples of when you worked on a production or a live event that something didn't quite go as planned, or maybe there were opportunities lost.
I was a PA working for a corporate event in New York City, and it was an outdoor event in the middle of November, super cold, and I did a lot of running around, running errands, going to Home Depot, going to Starbucks, going to whatever anybody needed, I was going to do it. And the person that was the production coordinator for the job was a stage manager who did a lot of trade shows and things, and this was about 8 years ago. And I spoke to him, and when he said what he did, I was like, I don't know that I really like that. That doesn't sound interesting. It sounds kind of boring. But then in the back of my head, I was like, well, maybe we should talk, just because you never know. And maybe I don't know anything about it. I've never done it, so how do I really know it's boring or not? Anyway, opportunity came and went. And basically, I worked with this person for about 3 weeks straight and didn't actually take the opportunity to speak with them. And it's one of my, looking back on my careers, going, should have taken that opportunity. I had someone right in front of me and could have done that. And now it's funny, because now I've gotten into sort of working trade shows, and the one I did last week was one of the most fun events that I've run in a very, very long time, and had a blast. And so I think to myself, especially this week after having done this last event, could I have been there 8 years ago if I had just taken advantage of that opportunity? And I'll never know. And so it's one of those things of always taking advantage of who's around you and finding out who's around you. So that to me is a huge lesson in life about that.
Yeah, for me, I can actually come back to my learning the lighting world, actually, and you think about all the paperwork that goes, actually lighting and stage management as well, and pretty much all disciplines in this industry require lots and lots of paperwork to be generated. And as I said before, one of the unique parts about this industry is, or maybe not that unique actually, is that a lot of work gets done during non-business hours. And I think paperwork is one of those things that happens quite a bit. You go home, you put together your contact lists and your schedules, or your light rate and your plots and things like that, and then you show up for rehearsal, or show up for prep, or show up for load in, and you've got all this incredible paperwork that's been generated. And for me as a young electrician and as a young stage manager, there was always that, like, well, how did you do that? I feel like I'm only able to get in and see this small part of what you do, which is, the on-site work, and as someone who is coming in, and the only real opportunities that I had to learn were sort of on the job training. you find out very quickly that a lot of other things happen before you're on site. And so for me, it was this struggle of I received a lot of experience and a lot of hands-on exposure to one subset of what the manager did. And then there was this whole other part that I was, even after 2 or 3 years, I was still completely in the dark. And so I think that's something that I've always tried to keep in mind as someone who's now doing, a decent amount of teaching and things like that. I try to make sure that whoever is learning from me, has exposure to as many parts of my workflow as possible so that they can see the entire process from start to finish.